Welcome to the Quoted Interview Series, where we get to the bottom of what's top of mind with rock stars in the media landscape, especially journalists. I'm your host, Lou Carlozo, coming to you from the beautiful Quoted Quonset Hut in Chicago. And on today's show, someone in a niche of media that I've never really explored in terms of an interview. So, really looking forward to this. And that has to do with the media operator space. And we have with us Jacob Cohen Donnelly. Based in New York, Jacob is the founder of a media operator subscription based media company that he founded in 2019 for those building digital media companies. As founder, Jacob digs into the most important topics about digital media for media operators by a media operator. A career-long media veteran, Jacob was publisher at Morning Brew from June 2022 to December 2023, and prior to that ran digital revenue and marketing at CoinDesk, someone who is a lifelong media person, as I mentioned. Great to have you with us, Jacob. Welcome to the Quoted Interview Series.
It's great to be here, Lou. Good to talk.
Absolutely. Now, this whole area of covering media operators is new to me. I'd love it if you could tell us about a media operator, what moved you to start it, and where you see your place in the media ecosystem.
So my whole career, I've worked in B2B media, worked at an industrial directory at a college, spent 4 years at CoinDesk, which, kind of was a prosumery type publication. We covered the industry for the industry, spent 3 years at Morning Brew running their B2B business. And the thing I've learned is that every single industry has its quote unquote trade publication. It's a phrase I don't love. I don't love, the trades, but like every industry going back 100 years plus has had a publication that covered what was going on in that industry. And so in 2019, when I launched AMO, I didn't even launch it with thinking about that so much in mind, but I really just wanted a place to write about how I thought people should build media companies. This was in the later stages of mass scale media where, a number of companies like BuzzFeed and Vice Media and Vice had raised obscene amount of money to build their businesses, and I just didn't think that that was the right way to do it. So, 2019, everyone's launching a Substack. Everyone thinks that that's the future, and so I thought, all right, let me jump on board, and I did that, and it started to gain a little bit of momentum. I called it a media operator because when I look at the media industry, like there is no truly original idea, right? Our business is very simple. We create content, we use that content theoretically to build an audience, then we monetize that audience either directly or indirectly, and we use that money to invest back into creating more content. And fundamentally, it's an execution game and it becomes an operating game. How well can you operate? How well can you build a sustainable business? And so, a media operator sort of came from there. Um, from that kind of perspective, kind of the reason I started to lean in more aggressively with it is, there weren't a lot of other great places out there writing about media the way that I was. And when your audience tells you they like what you're doing, you should probably keep doing it.
Yep. And all the more remarkable given that you started in 2019, 2020, COVID hits. Did that affect what you were doing at all? I mean, I imagine it has to be this thing looking back where it was a bombshell for media operators, but also an opportunity for you to cover something in a brand new way. How did that affect the space and what you were doing in it?
So from my perspective, I had a day job. So the pandemic was much harder for the day job because, we had a massive event May 2020, and obviously, and we're talking, 5, 6, 7,000 people. And then pandemic comes and well, we had to completely pivot from an event that was going to be in person to we did a 24-hour live stream basically all around the world. So it was actually very hard from that perspective. But I think for many publishers, once you got through like March, April, and you kind of knew kind of what was going to start happening, a lot of publishers actually did pretty well. People had a lot more time at home, so they were consuming more content. Advertisers were spending, and so 2020 and 2021, and especially 2021, were particularly strong for media companies from an advertising perspective. Um, I think what happened now, and we're still kind of recovering from this, is that once you get to the second half of 2022, inflation is starting to become more of a topic. We roll into 2023, and again, we're still dealing with some of these aftershocks now. The market kind of constricted, and so I think publishers are now still to some extent dealing with the hangover from the pandemic. Um, Building AMO, I think what was interesting was I have a lot of B2B readers, and at that time it was most of my readers were B2B media companies, and a decent number of them had events businesses. And so for them, seeing their events businesses have to pivot, there was a lot of conversations around is the future of events virtual, right? Are we ever going to actually go back face to face? I think there was a lot of uncertainty there. I think there was a lot of overconfidence about a person's willingness to sit in front of a screen for 6 hours a day and listen to content. Um, I think, and we've seen this since the pandemic has ended, there's been a mass rush back to in-person events. Um, but from my perspective, I think the media industry did pretty okay during the pandemic because of how much attention there was. There's a little bit of a hangover, or there was. I think we're kind of through it though. This year's sort of geopolitical uncertainty has certainly made it hard to operate for some publishers.
Yeah, and you talked about the conversation back then. I'd be fascinated to know today in 2025, what's the conversation? What are people talking about that comes up as a theme or maybe a recurrent theme that really is driving the media operator space to pay attention or to debate a bit?
So I think that there's a lot of people are really focused on AI. I don't think that you have probably had any conversation over the past couple of years where AI hasn't popped up. Um, and I think that that's understandable for two reasons. One, publishers who have depended on traffic and really just like, get as many people to the website will monetize that way. They have, and they are now in a bit of a shock seeing their traffic numbers compress. I mean, no publisher on the planet, I guess that's not true. No publisher on the planet has seen their Google traffic expand if they were already at scale using SEO and Google as a traffic source. That is constricting. And I think that for a lot of publishers, figuring out what to do with people not clicking over in the era of zero, Google Zero and ChatGPT, starting to become more of a used tool. So on one hand, it's what are we going to do about this compression in traffic? On the other side is this technology is really interesting. How can we make it applicable to our sites and to our publications? Um, and so that's actually an interesting conversation because, when I look at how do you operate a business, there's a lot of people in the middle who do tasks that if we could use AI to help with that, you can have one person accomplish a lot more work, and you know, technophobes or Luddites would say that, well, that's just going to destroy jobs. But with every single technological innovation, it's only made it more efficient for people to do jobs and accomplish more. And so I'm looking forward to seeing how, and I think a lot of operators are really looking at AI in the operating of their businesses, right? Can I build an audience segment far faster, right? Can I um, build a journey in a marketing automation tool so that I'm able to promote a certain offer to a certain segment rather than it taking 3 hours to build that? Could I have a conversation with, my chatbot in my marketing stack and say, hey, let's build this? And I think that can be really interesting because now you've got a marketer who can just do more. And that's exciting. So, I think that's a really big topic. like I said, every single publisher or most publishers are really thinking about, is there an event strategy? And in some respects, the event strategy is sort of the anti-AI uh, thesis, right? Where face to face, people are always going to want to talk face to face, and you can't really use AI to do that for you. And so I think that that is something that a lot of people are looking at. I mean, half of our business is an event, so there's real opportunity and value there for a lot of these media companies.
That's fascinating. We've got two different, almost diametrically opposite ends of the spectrum, the technology. And by the way, I agree with you 1,000%. I don't want to go back to the days of typewriters or writing everything out in triplicate. If somebody else does, good for them. And then the events, and I've been at quite a few. I was actually involved as an MC at Money 2020 in Las Vegas in October. And I could feel this palpable sense of relief that finally we're back at events. Finally, we're meeting people. Finally, we're having coffee and dinner with people. We're trading information in real time. It would seem that those things are opposing ends, opposing forces, but really they're working together, I would think, to make the industry move forward.
Yeah, look, as a species, we're a social creature, right? Like, I'm a bit of an introvert and I certainly get tired when I have to over network. And like, I have never been to Money 2020. The thought of having to see that many people just almost overwhelms me. But for most people, they want to talk to other people. And so the ability to convene folks and the ability to actually bring them into one space, I think is hugely important. And if you can do that, that in and of itself is somewhat of a moat for your business. Now, what is interesting is, what does the event look like in an era of AI? In an era of, we're doing a podcast right now. I'm bringing my podcast back. There are thousands of podcasts out there. And so when the person who is speaking at your event also happens to have been on 5 podcasts that year, what is the value of them speaking? Like, what is the value of going to paying to go to an event to see that person? If I can ask ChatGPT, what is everything that Lou has said about media over the past 10 years, and kind of get like a brief on that? Like, do I need to know what you're going to say? And so I think events are going to have to some extent, rethink a little bit what their purpose is. But people are always going to want to be together. That's never going to go away. We saw that during the pandemic. As quickly as people could possibly break out of their stay at home policy, they did. People want to be around people.
Yeah, you nailed it. And it may be that the events of the future involve some sort of real time collaboration where people are not only together, but they're creating things. And by the way, Money 2020, you need like a roller derby, like the shoulder pads. I should be patting my elbows, the elbow pads as well. You need the helmet. And you need a lot of ibuprofen and caffeine. It is really, even for an extrovert, it's a daunting task to get through the convention and do it in one piece. Now,
But a ton of business gets done there, right? Like, if you're in sales and in finance, and for financial technology, it makes a lot of sense to be there because there are very few places that are going to have that many people. And so you kill it for 4 days or however long their show is, and then you can go back and get back to work and sort of calm down. So I think the question for the events industry will be, if everyone is launching events and everyone is doing so many events, at what point do people realize that there are the must attend events and the nice to attend events? So there is actually a possibility that we'll see a bit of a shakeout in the events industry over the next, 12 to 18 months, where some shows don't work as well because there's just too many.
yeah, could not agree more. And speaking of agreement, you'll have to bear with me because you've obviously heard this before, but this will be new to viewers. was in August, you wrote about why newsletters need to integrate content growth and monetization. So I'm going to quote from that story. This in particular caught my eye. As the inbox becomes more bloated and AI gets more integrated in creating synopses, having a product that users seek out rather than passively receiving is becoming much more important. The math is simple. Engaged readers share content, refer friends, and click on sponsor messages. Disengaged readers delete or just never open. There's a reason that companies like 1440, Morning Brew, Workweek, and others can generate millions of dollars in revenue in the inbox. The audience is so highly engaged that sponsors are thrilled to spend higher rates than expected from an advertisement. Very well played, Jacob. So the millions of dollars question I have is, how do you build engagement? How do you sustain it? It has stumped a great many media operators, founders, people in the space, really intelligent people.
It shouldn't stump people. This isn't rocket science. If we go back to the flywheel that I talked about, um, you start with creating content, you use that content to build an audience, and then once you have that audience, you monetize it. The issue is so much of the focus in digital media has been on tactics to grow audience rather than focusing on creating unbelievable content. At Morning Brew, we spent a ton of time on, on the B2B side, which I ran on the consumer side that, was already at mass scale when I joined. Like they spent a ton of time making that newsletter as amazing as possible, right? They would print it out every single day and see where people were engaging. They would look at the data to see what stories people were interested in versus what stories people weren't interested in. Uh, there was an incredible voice where people enjoyed what they were reading. If you really understand what your audience is like, what's the job they're trying to do when they consume your piece of content, and then you make that piece of content as great as it can possibly be, people will seek it out. Like it really isn't anything more than that. Now, creating great content is hard. It is expensive. It takes effort. Um, but when we did it within the confines of the inbox, there's only so much that we had to create to sustain a mass group of people. We had over 4 million subscribers and we only needed to create like 6 or 7 pieces of content a day, whereas if you think about the New York Times, they have to publish, 1,000 articles, not a day, but quite, I don't actually know how many articles they publish a day, to be honest. Um, but really it's come back to basics. What does your audience need your content for? And too often people are creating content simply because we got to create content. Why do you have to create content? Because Google's sending us free traffic and we're going to monetize with ads. We focused on the tactics of how to get traffic rather than focusing on what does our audience need? What is the job to be done? And that's where, all these very smart people missed the boat. Like they forgot that there were people behind those page views. They got hung up on the page view and they did not spend time thinking about what is it this person needs.
Very important. I have a banking podcast, Bankadelic, and think about that all the time. This idea, who's listening? What are they? What are the common points that these people have? What's the thread that connects them? Why are they listening to my podcast? What do they like? What don't they like? What are the engagement points? And I'll be honest, it's still very much a learning curve for me. So as I go, I'm trying to gather intelligence, whether it's having conversations or just looking at the views and which podcasts hit the mark and which ones didn't, even what day of the week people are going to be most engaged. So I love that you're pointing out this angle of looking beyond the clicks, the page views, to the actual people and how they are digesting the content and what it means to them. So outstanding. I would love to also get a view as we head into the sunset here in terms of what it is you love being, what it is that you love about being a media operator and a founder, where you have found the deepest satisfaction and also face some of the greatest challenges to make it work for you?
Look, there are plenty of industries in the world that are easier to operate in. Media is a tough industry just because there are a ton of players who are trying to disintermediate us. The technology sector doesn't care. They steal our content willy-nilly with not a care in the world. What I love about this industry is for people like when I think about AMO, when I think about many of the publications, and the executives that read our publications, they can make a direct connection between the work that they do and an impact on somebody's like professional or personal life, right? Whether that's your job or whether that's a hobby of yours or whether, if it's a news company, keeping people informed about what is important and shining light on problems. I have always just found content and journalism to just be one of those really kind of fundamental things that matter. Um, and so I've always just wanted to work around that. But from what I know about myself and what I was good at, I knew that the best place for me to play was always on the business side. If I can generate enough revenue, we can make it possible to do this great work. So, when I think about like why this industry and like why media, fundamentally, I just believe it matters. When I was at Morning Brew, I ran a network of B2B publications, and I remember talking to one of our salespeople, and he was like, I have this converse. I'll sell a newsletter ad, and then I'll follow up with the team, and they'll, that bought the ad, and they'll say, it was incredible. We ran that ad, and we've closed X amount of business because of that advertisement. And so you look at that and you go, this ad resulted in, X amount of financial impact to the advertiser, which means the advertiser's growing, which means they're going to be able to hire more people, which means they might be able to raise their next round, which, means that they'll be able to get even bigger. And like that felt really impactful. And like there was a direct connection, right? And it was the same thing with readers, where readers could understand information and make decisions for their, for their day-to-day jobs. And that just felt good. Um, Now on the side as a founder, look, building a business is tough. It's always going to be tough. And building a business about an industry that is going through as much disruption as media is tough, right? Like, I joke with friends that I definitely chose a hard vertical to operate in as a media operator. Um, but at the end of the day, I get to build the business and I get to build the publication that I believe matters. And I get to, serve an audience and give them the information they need. And that's exciting, So, it's tough. It's a lot of work. It's stressful, but I wouldn't trade it for anything.
And it's a great thing that you're doing it. It does matter, and it's positive consequences all the way around. You're making a difference. Jacob, thank you so much for being a part of the Quoted interview series. We'll keep up with you and hopefully have you back again at some point.
Appreciate it, Lou.
Jacob Cohen Donnelly is the founder of A Media Operator, a subscription-based media company. Be sure to check it out at the letter A, Media Operator, all one word.com. And you can also look for Jacob on LinkedIn, somewhere in the city of New York as well. Thanks for tuning in, everyone, to the Quoted interview series. Our producer in Chicago is Ken Montone. A special thanks to the co-founders of Quoted, our own Dan Simon and Matt Neller. Thanks as well to Kelly Jura and Ashlyn Anderson. Our staff engineer is Jeton Jaycott, and our Columbia College Chicago intern is Jacob Areza. Don't forget that Quoted is the world's #1 platform for bringing journalists, PRs, and subject matter experts together, not just in service of the story, but also in the spirit of building community and connections. I'm Lou Carlozo, the editor-in-chief of Quoted, your host. Remember to check out my financial services podcast, Bankadelic, which you can hear via Apple Podcasts and SoundCloud. Until next time, stay true, stay tuned, and stay suddenly connected.